So, good evening, everyone. My name is Soham, and welcome to this lecture. I hope everyone's doing fine. They're doing okay. And today's lecture is going to be about the law of torts. It's going to be all about the introduction to the law of torts, where we'll be discussing certain basic concepts which might strengthen your understanding of what a tort is and how to actually look at law of torts. So, firstly, what we're going to be covering today: the definition of a tort, the aspect of injury or harm, where we'll be discussing certain essential characteristics that a tortious act has, and where we'll also be looking at certain nuances of the definition of a tort and what actually constitutes as a tort. So secondly, the essentials of a tortious act. What are the essential prerequisite characteristics of a tortious act? Now, there is a caveat in this particular section, which I'll be discussing further in the lecture as well. But for now, you have to know that what the essentials of a tortious act are. Thirdly, the basis and purpose of tort law. Why do we have this body of law in general? Why do we need tort law? Where is tort law emanated from? What is the basis of it all? So all these questions will be answered in this section. And lastly, we'll look at the violation of legal rights, which includes discussing the principle of injuria sine damnum and damnum sine injuria. This is a brief roadmap of what we'll be covering today. So without further ado, let's begin with the first section, which is the definition and characteristics of a tort. So simply put, a tort is an act or an omission that causes injury or harm to another, and it amounts to a civil wrong. Now, there are certain exceptions to this particular section where it says that it amounts to a civil wrong. But for now, you just need to understand that the majority of torts or the majority of tortious acts covered within the ambit of tort law amount to civil wrongs. There are certain exceptions, of course, which are not within the scope of this lecture. So what does injury or harm or causing injury or harm to someone mean? Now, simply put, injury or harm is the violation of a legal right that causes a loss or detriment to someone. Now, such a loss or detriment can be in any form. It can be a monetary loss, it can be a physical harm, it can be loss in any way. So there is no strict categorization as to what kind of loss is covered by tort law. So this is the aspect of injury or harm. So a tort is basically an act. Now, what does it being an act mean? Now, an act basically means something which is consciously done by a person. And in the context of tort law, an act is something that an individual should not do or ought not to have done. So an example of an act is, a simple example is trespass. Now, I'm consciously doing the act of trespassing on someone's property, and such a trespass or such an act of mine, such a conscious act of mine, causes legal injury to them. Simple as that. Now, secondly, what is an omission then? So an act is doing something. So on the other hand, what should an omission be? An omission is something which an individual ought to have done, and they haven't done that particular thing in that situation, which has given rise to an injury or harm caused to another. So polar opposites like that. Act is something which an individual should do or individual should not do or individual ought not to do. And an omission is basically something that an individual ought to have done and they haven't done that particular thing. And both these things give a rise to an injury or harm to another. So an example of an omission is negligence. For example, let's say there's a doctor and they haven't taken certain precautions required for a surgery to be successful. And because of that, the patient has suffered a particular damage. And because of this damage suffered, the patient actually brings an action against the doctor. And thus, because of the doctor not doing a thing or omitting to do something, it gives rise to tortious liability. I hope you've understood this part. This is kind of the basic. So I've broken down the definition of tort here. an act or an omission that causes injury or harm to another and amounts to a civil wrong. Now, I'm deliberately not getting into the aspect of damages right now because we want to understand torts from the perspective of an act or an omission and not from the perspective of damages for now. We'll come to that later. But for now, all you have to understand is that a tort is an act or an omission that causes an injury or harm to another. And it is completely uncodified as well. Now, what does this mean? This basically means that there is no particular act or law or anything like that which codifies or has sections for tort law or tortious acts. It is completely uncodified and it is judge-made law, which means that because of it being uncodified, judges have to develop the jurisprudential principles involved in torts, and thus they do so based on the facts and circumstances of each case. That is why it is called an uncodified law. Moving on, we look at the basis and purpose of tort law. What is tort law actually based on? So it is a lot of different laws in today's world, like let's say contract law or criminal law, have very complicated conceptual base. But tort law isn't, this is not the case with tort law actually, because it is only based on a simple general rule of morality, that no one has the right to cause injury or harm to someone with or without intention. Now, this very thing has been told to us by our parents, our teachers, and everyone. That is why I'm saying that this is a very prevalent moral principle of society that has been passed down by our teachers, our parents, and thus it is a simple basis, not as complicated as other laws to understand. So what are the purposes of torts law again? Firstly, to compensate the aggrieved person for any losses, injury, or harm caused by any other person. Simple. This is a general analysis, of course. And the second purpose is to deter or discourage a person from committing any violation of legal rights. There should be some deterrence mechanism so that people don't repeat offenses or people don't do something which might violate someone else's legal rights. So it serves as a deterrence mechanism as well, or something which discourages a person from doing an act which violates someone's legal right. Moving on, we look at the essential elements of a tort. As we discussed in the definition before, an act or an omission that causes injury or harm to another. Okay. What should be the essential elements based on this? Firstly, a wrongful act or an omission and an injury or harm caused to another individual. So this is basically a basic blueprint of what a tort should be and what a tort is. And a lot of different tortious activities follow this particular formula. However, this is not a hard and fast formula. This is not a rule of thumb that all torts are like this. There are certain exceptions that we will be covering in this very lecture. There are certain situations where this particular formula doesn't apply, but they still are tortious acts. So an example of this, let's take the example of trespass. Now, according to this very imposing sign right here, we understand that there should be no trespassing on this particular property. No one should enter this property without the owner's permission or consent. But what if I do? What if I just say, oh, let's go. I'm a bad person, so let's go enter this property. Let's see what happens. So what is the wrongful act here? So the wrongful act here is me entering the property without the owner's consent or his authority, in spite of there being this sign or in spite of me knowing that I should not be on this property. So that fulfills the first criteria, which is the wrongful act criteria. Oh. So how is the second criteria fulfilled in this particular example? Injury or harm caused. So since me trespassing on the owner's property infringes upon his right to enjoy this property or his exclusive right to enjoy his property, since he, let's say, is the sole owner, then I am infringing upon his legal right to enjoy his property, thus causing an injury or harm. And what does injury or harm mean? The violation of a legal right that causes a loss or detriment to someone. So that is how trespass can be brought under this particular formula. A second example is nuisance. Now, as you see from this illustration, this gentleman here is really not happy with the work that is being carried out next to his house. So let's say that there is a deadline in his area that, oh, no work should be carried out after 10 p.m. And in spite of that, this particular construction company decides to carry on with its work. Now, why is this a wrongful act? Does this fulfill the first criteria? Yes, because it is explicit. They are explicitly contravening the law. They are explicitly in violation of the law that 10 बजे के बाद इधर construction नहीं होना चाहिए. And what is the legal right, or sorry, what is the injury or harm caused here? It also means what is the legal right which is being infringed upon. So the legal right that is being infringed upon here is the residents' right to enjoy peaceful environment. Now, because of this construction, the residents might not be able to enjoy that. The residents' right, and there also might be different issues arising from this, which might cause harm. Let's say someone goes deaf because of the sound. That is a direct harm. Therefore, wrongful act or omission plus injury or harm caused. Now let's look at the second aspect of this. Why is this not a hard and fast formula? This question brings us to this particular realm, the violation of legal rights without damage and vice versa. Injuria sine damnum and damnum sine injuria. Now, I'd like to explain these concepts with the help of an example. I'd like to start with an example. So from the viewpoint of this example, I'm going to explain what injuria sine damnum is. So as you can see in this picture, this gentleman is very late for work. And let's say that while he is on his commute to work, he's rushing, he wants to get to work as soon as possible. There's an important meeting, but he is on his way and he's caught by policemen. He's caught by policemen and he's not able to go attend his workplace and attend his meeting or get his work done or any other similar things. So I have a question. Can this person sue the policeman for damages? Even though, let's say he didn't suffer any loss. The company said that it's okay, you didn't come to work for one day. It's fine, we understand. Not a big deal. It's okay, you didn't attend this meeting. It wasn't as crucial as we thought. Not a big deal. Still, so this means that there is no ascertainable injury or harm caused to this person. But can he sue the policeman for wrongfully detaining him? Yes. This is because of the principle of injuria sine damnum, which means injury without damage. Now, in cases of injuria sine damnum, there is a violation of a legal right without causing any actual damage, monetary or physical or anything like that to someone. So this basically means that only their legal right is violated and the aggrieved person hasn't really suffered a harm or damage. Simple as that. So in this particular context, legal right of this person to go to his office was violated by the police because he was wrongfully detained. Even though he didn't suffer losses, his company said that it's okay, no big deal. But still, his legal right was violated, which gives him grounds to file a tortious claim. As simple as that. Injury without damage, injuria sine damnum. So let's look at the polar opposite of this. Now, I like to call this the curious case of Domino's and Pizza Hut. I'm sure you guys have eaten from both places. You might have a preference as to which one's better. My personal one is Domino's. So what happened in this particular case? Let's say there was an outlet of Pizza Hut, which was operating in a particular area. It had a good customer base. A lot of customers used to come there for delivery, to sit in the restaurant and eat pizza and all that. And business was booming, let's say. But what happens one day that a Domino's outlet opens right next to it. So people like me who like Domino's more and who had to go to Pizza Hut because there was no Domino's there will definitely flock to the Domino's, right? So let's say that Pizza Hut suffers a lot of losses because of Domino's taking over its customer base. Monetary losses. Pizza Hut doesn't have that kind of customer base after Domino's opens. What can Pizza Hut? So let's say Pizza Hut approaches you and says that give me a remedy. Tell me what should I do in this situation. So what will you tell them? You will acquaint them with the principle of damnum sine injuria, which means damage without a legal injury. So what happens in this situation? So the damage has been caused without the violation of a legal right. The damages caused to Pizza Hut here were obviously monetary. They suffered heavy losses because a lot of customers were absorbed by Domino's. But was Domino's well within its legal right to open an outlet there? Definitely. And has any legal right of Pizza Hut been violated because of Domino's opening? Absolutely not. So damage has been caused without the violation of a legal right. Even though there is a damage caused, monetary or physical, it isn't necessarily a violation of one's legal right. And therefore, it is not an actionable tortious claim. You can't claim tortious liability in cases of damnum sine injuria. So this again is a deviation from what we discussed here, not a hard and fast formula. In both these situations, either of these elements was missing. In injuria sine damnum, there was injury without damage, and in damnum sine injuria, there was damage without injury. So again, this is not a hard and fast formula, but again, it helps us to understand a broad variety of torts, including trespass, nuisance, and anything of that sort. This marks the end of my lecture. Thank you so much for coming in. And I hope you gained a better understanding of the basics of tort law and the concept that I discussed here with the help of the examples that I discussed. I thank you for attending this lecture, and I hope to see you again. Thank you.